Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Buckle Up, where we get hands-on with new watches. So today Rolex has kindly invited us to check out the latest GMT-Master, but before we get hands-on with the new watch, why don't we take a step back and look into the history of the model. As many of you may know, the watch was actually a result of a collaboration between Rolex and the now defunct Pan Am Airlines. So they wanted a watch that was able to look at multiple time zones, so obviously very useful for pilots and frequent travelers. And the way they did that was with a 24-hour bezel and an extra GMT hand. This has led to the GMT-Master having the widest bezel variations in its history. The very first reference was the 6542, released in 1954. And that featured a bakelite bezel that had half of the hours in blue and half of them in red. Blue denoting the hours during the night and red denoting the hours during the day. Moving on from the bakelite bezel, Rolex then used aluminium bezels for both the GMT-Master and GMT-Master II lines for almost 50 years. Among the aluminium bezels, there are multiple options. There was the all black, there was the red and blue, commonly known as the Pepsi, black and red, aka the Coke, brown and gold, aka Roots Beer for the two-tone models, brown on the full gold model, and finally the most controversial one, all blue, aka the Blueberry. It's controversial because even till this day, the collectors community cannot agree whether they actually officially existed. Nowadays, we take for granted that many Rolex sports models have the ceramic bezel, and it makes a lot of sense for the GMT-Master given its scratch-resistant properties and its ability to not have its color fade over time, unlike its aluminium predecessors. It's important to remember that the GMT-Master was actually the first model within the Rolex's lineup to receive this ceramic bezel, and it came in the form of the reference 116718LN, which featured an all-black bezel and was released in 2005. Back then, there were many calls from the collectors community to release a Pepsi version of this ceramic bezel, but it wasn't until 2014 that they released it in the white gold version of the GMT. 4 years later, 2018, they finally brought that bezel into the steel reference 126710BLRO, and this remains one of the most popular references in Rolex's history. Within the ceramic bezels, there's also multiple options, which featured an all-black bezel, a black and green, which is called Sprite, black and blue, aka Batman/Batgirl, and black and brown, also called the Root Beer for the Everrose models. The gray was never a color that featured on these bezels until 2023, where they released it for the two-tone steel and yellow gold, as well as the full yellow gold model. 1 year later, this year, Rolex has decided to bring this bezel to the steel model in the reference 126710GR&R. This fills the void that was left with the discontinuation of the reference 116710LN, which featured an all-black bezel, so it was the perfect choice for someone who was looking for something a little bit more subtle, but also a GMT. Looking at the bezel itself, under certain lighting, the gray almost looks a bit black, but in other lighting, the gray really pops, proving it to be a two-tone bezel. This means the watch is very versatile for both formal and casual attire. Proportion-wise, Rolex has maintained the 40mm diameter, 48mm lug-to-lug, and 12mm of thickness. And as always, the sloped case back hides the thickness very well when you have the watch on the wrist. The watch comes in both Oyster or Jubilee bracelet, and my personal preference is actually the Jubilee, even though I appreciate the versatility and sportiness of the Oyster. Remember, this watch was designed for pilots and frequent travelers, so I think the Jubilee bracelet is the natural home for this watch, and it adds an air of elegance to it. But it doesn't matter which one you pick, I'm sure you'll find the watch is very versatile, elegant, and robust, and will be able to accompany you on all kinds of adventures no matter where you're flying.